Wise enjoyment of sense pleasure. A. Diverse grades of happiness. The Buddha stated that he had realized this sublime happiness independent of sensuality, karma, and for this reason he could assert that he would not circle back to seek out sense pleasure again. Had he not experienced this sublime happiness, he would not have been able to make such an assertion. The Buddha then went on to say that even though noble disciples clearly discern with right wisdom that sense pleasure has little sweetness and much suffering, that it has much affliction and danger, if they have not yet experienced the sublime bliss and happiness independent of sensuality, they will not yet be able to say with confidence that they will not revert back in search of sense pleasure. Similarly, he warned the monks in particular that if someone who has gone forth has not yet savoured the sublime bliss and happiness independent of sensual pleasures, it is still possible for various defilements like covetousness, ill will, restlessness, laziness, and boredom to overwhelm the mind. Such a person will not delight in the holy life, or will not be able to endure living the holy life. Apart from demonstrating the importance Buddhism gives to happiness, these references also reveal how noble disciples do not abandon sense desire, because sensuality is void of pleasure, or because Buddhism teaches to abstain from pleasure. Buddhism acknowledges pleasure and happiness as it truly exists. It encourages people to practice in order to achieve happiness, and it recognizes that sensuality comprises one form of happiness. Noble disciples abandon sense desire because they see that, despite the inherent pleasures of sensuality, it is still mixed up with a great deal of suffering. And importantly, there is a more profound form of happiness, exceeding that of sense pleasure, exceeding the pleasures derived from consuming the various delightful objects in the world. Noble disciples abandon sense desire because they have savoured this more refined form of happiness. There are thus different levels of happiness. Here we can examine how Buddhism classifies them. The Dukkha Nipata of the Anguttara Nikaya separates happiness into various kinds and degrees, providing a long list of pairs, including the happiness of householders and the happiness of renunciants, the happiness of sensuality and the happiness of renunciation, mundane happiness and transcendent happiness, and the happiness of noble beings and the happiness of ordinary beings. A clear and detailed classification of the various levels of happiness is the teaching on the 10 levels of happiness, which is found in many places in the Tipitaka. 1. Sense pleasure, kama, joy and happiness dependent on the 5 chords of sensuality, kama guna. 2. Happiness of the first jhana, patama jhana sukha, happiness of the first jhana, which is removed from sensuality and unwholesome states, and is comprised of initial and sustained thought, vitaka and vichara, bliss, piety, happiness, sukha, and one-pointedness, ekagata. 3. Happiness of the second jhana, ditya jhana sukha, happiness of the second jhana, which is comprised of bliss, piety, happiness, sukha, and one-pointedness, ekagata. 4. Happiness of the third jhana, Tatiya jhana sukha. Happiness of the third jhana, which is comprised of happiness, sukha, and one-pointedness, ekagata. 5. Happiness of the fourth jhana, Katutta jhana sukha. Happiness of the fourth jhana, which is comprised of equanimity, upekkha, and one-pointedness, ekagata. 6. Happiness of the attainment of the sphere of unbounded space, akasa jnana tayatana samapattisukha. In this concentrative attainment, one transcends the perception of form, rupasanya, and the perception of repulsion, patigasanya, and one pays no attention to the perception of diversity, yanatasanya. One directs attention solely on the infinity of space. 7. Happiness of the attainment of the sphere of unbounded consciousness, Vijnanan Chayatana Samapatti Sukha. In this concentrative attainment, one meditates on the infinity of consciousness as one's object of attention. 8. Happiness of the attainment of the sphere of nothingness, Kanyayatana Samapatti Sukha. In this concentrative attainment, one meditates on the state of nothingness as one's object of attention. 9. Happiness of the attainment of the sphere of neither perception nor non-perception, Neva Sanya Na Sanyayatana Samapatti Sukha. 10. Happiness associated with the attainment of the cessation of perception and feeling, Sanya Veda Yita Nirodha Samapatti Sukha. It is possible to abbreviate these 10 kinds of happiness into 3 levels. 1. Happiness associated with sensuality, Kama Sukha. 2. Happiness associated with jhana, Jhana Sukha, or happiness associated with 8 concentrative attainment, Atta Samapatti Sukha, which can be further divided into 2 subcategories. 2.1. Happiness associated with the 4 fine material jhanas, and 2.2. Happiness associated with the 4 formless jhanas. 3. Happiness associated with the attainment of cessation, Nirodha Samapatti. All of these aforementioned kinds of happiness are acknowledged as constituting happiness, but they are seen as representing gradually more refined and superior forms of happiness. The initial kinds of happiness still contain harmful aspects and are tied up with suffering. The higher forms of happiness are more refined and pure. The scriptures teach to recognize these kinds of happiness as they truly are. Both their pleasurable aspects and those aspects tied up with suffering. Both are advantages at sada, positive aspect, and disadvantages at dinawa, negative aspect. Both are merits and dangers. Moreover, they reveal the way out, the escape, nitsarana, or the freedom from all conditioned states of happiness, which is independent of both the advantages and disadvantages. When one sees the dangers of coarser forms of happiness, one becomes disenchanted by them and aspires towards more refined happiness. And when one has witnessed for oneself refined forms of happiness, one abandons the coarser forms and seeks ever more sublime happiness. At the very least, one will not be overly engrossed in coarse pleasures. Whenever people are liberated in a decisive way, and the bonds of mental defilement have been utterly severed, they will never return to seek out coarser forms of happiness. They will experience only the refined happiness corresponding to a liberated mind. Experiencing these gradually more refined forms of happiness is one attribute of making progress in Dhamma practice. B. Sense pleasure and superior forms of happiness. Following are some teachings that help to clarify the aforementioned subject material. Monks. There are these 5 chords of sense pleasure, kama, guna, forms cognizable by the eye, sounds cognizable by the ear, odors cognizable by the nose, tastes cognizable by the tongue, tangibles cognizable by the body that are desirable, alluring, likeable and agreeable, attractive and provocative of lust. These are the 5 chords of sense pleasure. Now the happiness and joy that arises dependent on these 5 chords of sense pleasure is the gratification, asada, in the case of sense pleasures. The happiness of joy is called sensual pleasure, kama sukha. The term kama refers to 2 things: alluring material objects, vatu kama, desirable objects, and desire as mental impurity, kilesa kama, mental defilement that breeds desire. What are alluring material objects? Pleasing visual forms, sounds, smells, tastes, and tangibles, rugs, blankets, female and male servants, goats, sheep, chickens, pigs, elephants, cows, horses, donkeys, rice paddies, land, silver, gold, houses, villages, royal towns, states, countries, armies, and royal treasuries. Whatever material objects are the basis for attachment are called alluring material objects. Furthermore, all objects of desire existing in the past, present, and future, existing internally, externally, or both internally and externally, those that are base, middling, and superior, those belonging to beings in unhappy states of existence, belonging to human beings, and belonging to the celestial realms, those that are immediately at hand, Pachupatita, those that are self-created, Nimitta, and those that are created by others, Paranimitta, those owned and those not owned, those coveted and those not coveted, those that belong entirely to the sense sphere, Kama Vachara, those that belong entirely to the fine material sphere, Rupa Vachara, and those that belong entirely to the formless sphere, Arupa Vachara, which are the basis for craving. The objects of craving, they are called objects of desire on account of being a basis for desire, on account of being a basis for infatuation. All of these are called alluring material objects. And what is desire as mental impurity? Delight is desire, lust is desire, lustful attachment is desire, purpose, sankappa is desire, lustful preoccupation is desire, sensual desire, kama chanda, sensual lust, kama raga, sensual delight, kama nandi, sensual craving, kama tanha, sensual attachment, sinna, passion for sensual pleasure, infatuation for sensual pleasure, obsession with sensual pleasure, sense desire engulfing the mind, sense desire binding the mind, grasping to sensual pleasure, the hindrance of sensual desire, sense desire in the phrase, look here, sense desire, I see your origin, you arise from intention. I will no longer be preoccupied with you. By doing this, you will remain no longer. All these are called desire as mental impurity. Monks, the conception of an embryo in a womb takes place through the union of three things. When there is the union of the mother and father, and it is the mother's season, and the being is to be reborn as present. Through the union of these three things, the conception of an embryo in a womb takes place. The mother then carries the embryo in her womb for 9 or 10 months, with great risk to her life, as a heavy burden. Then, at the end of 9 or 10 months, the mother gives birth with great risk to her life, as a heavy burden. She then nourishes the newborn child with her own blood, for the mother's breast milk is called blood in the Noble One's tradition. A young infant child lying on his back plays even with his own urine and feces. What do you think? Isn't that completely amusing for that infant child? Yes, Venerable Sir. Some time later, when that child grows up and his faculties mature, he plays the games that are typical for children. Games with toy plows, stick games, somersaults, games with pinwheels, game with measures made of sand, games with toy chariots, games with toy bows. What do you think? Isn't this amusement superior and more refined than the former kind? Yes, Venerable Sir. At a still later time, as that boy continues to grow up and his faculties mature still further, he enjoys himself furnished and endowed with the 5 objects of sensual pleasure, with forms, sounds, odours, tastes, tangibles that are desirable, alluring, likeable and appealing, attractive and provocative of lust. What do you think? Isn't this amusement superior and more refined than the former kind? Yes, Venerable Sir. Among householders, the most exalted person is a universal emperor, Chakravarti, a wheel-turning monarch, who wields supreme power and is replete with material wealth. According to Buddhism, such a person is endowed with superior virtue. A universal emperor is thus considered to have the greatest amount of happiness, greater than that generally experienced by other human beings. The Buddha referred to the happiness of a universal monarch in order to describe the most complete form of ordinary human happiness, and to compare it with various other levels and degrees of happiness, revealing their relative subtlety and profundity. According to the ideal depiction, a universal emperor possesses 7 treasures, Ratana, and 4 kinds of success, Edi. The 7 treasures are as follows. 1. A precious wheel, signifying righteous and legitimate sovereignty. It enables the emperor to extend his empire of peace across the entire continent, reaching the oceans in all 4 directions. by using righteous methods and sustained by the delight of those who accept his rule. 2. A precious elephant, which is able to transport the emperor across the entire continent quickly in order to inspect the royal domain. 3. A precious horse, which is likewise able to transport the emperor across the entire continent quickly in order to inspect the royal domain. 4. A precious and powerful gem, which radiates light across great distances, enabling the emperor to move his troops at night or to have citizens from the land work at night as if it were daytime. 5. A precious queen who, besides having a beautiful body and complexion, surpasses that of all other women, also possesses a marvelous touch, described as gentle and soft as cotton or down. When cold, her body warms; when hot, her body cools. Her fragrance as sweet as sandalwood, her breath like the scent of a lotus. Moreover, she speaks pleasing words and knows how to minister to all the wishes of the emperor. 6. A precious treasurer who possesses the divine eye. He is able to spot sources of wealth in all places and is able to find as much gold and silver as the emperor desires. 7. A precious advisor who possesses exceptional talent as a rulership. Apart from offering correct counsel on official matters, he is able to direct all sorts of work projects and issue royal decrees in place of the emperor. The emperor's 4 kinds of success are as follows. 1. His outward appearance is more handsome and majestic than that of all other men. 2. His lifespan is longer than that of all other people. 3. He is healthy and strong, with few illnesses. 4. His subjects are loyal to him. They love him like children love their parents, and he loves them as a father loves his children. When he travels outside of the palace, the people receive him and wish to spend as much time as possible with him. He too wishes to spend time with them. The happiness and pleasure of such an emperor is superior to that of other people, including the young man referred to in the previous quotation. Nevertheless, the Buddha said that however great is the happiness of a universal emperor, it is paltry, even inconsequential, when compared to the happiness of the celestial realms. It is similar to comparing a small stone the size of one's palm to the towering Himalayas. Although divine happiness, Dibba Sukha, is an elevated form of sensual pleasure, greatly exceeding the sense pleasure of human beings, there exists a happiness more sublime than this. Such a latter form of sublime happiness is independent of sensuality and of external objects of gratification. Those who have experienced it feel no envy or desire when they see someone else who is enjoying abundant sense pleasure. This is similar to celestial beings who feel no envy or delight in the inferior happiness of human beings. Moreover, these individuals have no yearning even for divine happiness, because they have experienced a superior form of happiness. So too, Magandia, formerly when I lived the home life, I enjoyed myself, provided and endowed with 5 chords of sensual pleasure, with forms, sounds, fragrances, tastes, tangibles that are desirable, alluring, likeable, and appealing, attractive and provocative of lust. I had 3 palaces, one for the rainy season, one for the winter, and one for the summer. I lived in the rain's palace for the 4 months of the rainy season, enjoying myself with musicians who were all female, and I did not have to step out of the palace for 4 months. On a later occasion, having understood, as they actually are, the origin, the transcendence, the gratification, the danger, and the escape in the case of sensual pleasures, I abandoned craving for sensual pleasures. I dispelled the fever for sensual pleasures, and I abide without thirst, with a mind inwardly at peace. I see other beings who are not free from lust for sensual pleasures being devoured by craving for sensual pleasures, burning with fever for sensual pleasures, indulging in sensual pleasures, and I do not envy them, nor do I delight therein. Why is that? Because I delight in the happiness apart from sensual pleasures, apart from unwholesome states. Therefore I do not envy what is inferior, nor do I delight therein. Suppose Magandia, a householder or a householder's son, was rich, with great wealth and property, and being provided and endowed with the 5 cords of sensual pleasure, he might enjoy himself. Having conducted himself well, he might reappear in a happy destination, in the heavenly world, in the retinue of the gods of the 33, and there, surrounded by a group of nymphs in the Nandana grove, he would enjoy himself, provided and endowed with the 5 cords of divine sensual pleasure. Suppose he saw a householder or a householder's son enjoying himself, provided and endowed with the 5 cords of sensual pleasure. What do you think? Would that young god envy the householder or the householder's son for the 5 cords of sensual pleasure, delight in the 5 cords of human sensual pleasure, or be nostalgic for human sensual pleasures? No, Master Gautama. Why not? Because heavenly sensual pleasures are more excellent and sublime than human sensual pleasures. So too, Margandia, I do not envy them, nor do I delight therein, because I delight in the happiness apart from sensual pleasures, apart from unwholesome states, which surpasses divine bliss. Therefore, I do not envy an inferior happiness, nor do I delight therein.